Hello. The story I want to tell you today takes place in the Ural Mountains. The Ural Mountains are the boundary between Europe and Asia. The mountain range starts from the coast of the Kara Sea in the Arctic Ocean, extending to the Ural River Valley with a total length of over 2,500 kilometers. The average elevation is between 1,000 and 1,300 meters, with the highest peak being Mount Narodnaya at 1,895 meters. The Ural Mountains are covered in snow almost year-round. This place often attracts mountain climbing enthusiasts or expedition teams wanting to conquer the peaks. Although the altitude of the Ural Mountains is not the highest, the harsh terrain and climate present enthusiasts with many challenges and dangers. The main character of the story is named Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov. He was a student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute majoring in electronic engineering. He had very good practical skills. Since the age of 15, he was able to assemble a radio by himself. Dyatlov not only had a passion for radios, but also loved mountain climbing and hiking. After entering the Ural Polytechnic Institute, he joined a school sports club. He frequently participated in climbing and hiking activities. These activities were mainly conducted in the Ural Mountains, which he had climbed 8 times. Among those, he served as the group leader 5 times and was highly experienced. In the winter of 1959, Dyatlov planned to organize another hiking and climbing trip. His goal was Mount Otorten. The peak has an altitude of 1,182 meters located in the Sverdlovsk region, now Yekaterinburg of Russia. In the local language, the name of the mountain means, "Don't go there." But Dyatlov really wanted to conquer that mountain. He even chose the most difficult time to climb, winter. After identifying the goal, Dyatlov began searching for companions. Eventually, the group grew to 10 members, including 2 women. Among the 10 people mentioned, 9 were from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Dyatlov took the role of leader. After consulting a geologist, he and his team planned a detailed itinerary for the journey. According to the plan, on the day of departure, everyone would gather at the school. From there, they would begin their journey from Sverdlovsk city, passing through Ivdel, and reaching Vizhai, where they would rest for a bit. They would start their journey to Mount Otorten on January 28th. After crossing the peak, they planned to return to Vizhai on February 12th. The total time for the entire trip was expected to last about 20 days. Their team submitted the plan to the Sverdlovsk City Road Commission, and it was approved. All members of the team, led by Dyatlov, had received second-class mountain climbing certificates issued by the Soviet government. They were an experienced group of climbers. Since they chose the freezing winter for the trip and such a long route, relevant authorities considered their journey to have a certain level of difficulty. If successful, they would receive a third-class mountain climbing certificate, the highest level issued by the Soviet government. However, no one could have expected that during the process, the team members would encounter a disaster. What they went through shocked the entire world. This incident was once considered the strangest mountaineering event in human history. So, what happened on that trip? Next, let's turn back time to January 23rd, 1959. January 23, 1959 was a Friday. A group of 10 climbers led by Dyatlov, a 23-year-old student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, officially departed. They were starting a mountain journey lasting about 20 days. As planned, the group boarded a train and took 2 days to travel to Ivdel. After resting at 7 a.m., they continued by long-distance bus and arrived in Vizhai at 2 p.m. After several days of continuous travel, the team members felt a bit tired. Therefore, they decided to rest for a day in the town before setting off. After settling into a local hotel, they went to a local club together to watch a movie titled Symphony in Gold. The team members had a good night's sleep at the hotel that night, and the fatigue from days of travel was washed away. The next day, January 26th, all team members wrote letters home. Dyatlov, the leader, went to the local post office to mail them. He also sent a telegram to the school's sports club to report that they had arrived in Vijay and everything was going smoothly according to plan. 1:10 p.m. After lunch, the group climbed onto an open-bed truck and left Vijay. Because the weather was very cold and the truck had no cover, one team member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill due to the snowstorm and began suffering from femoral neuralgia. 4:30 p.m. The group arrived at a place about 40 kilometers north of Vijay called Settlement Number 41. Here, they were warmly welcomed by the local residents. They chatted with the locals, took photos together, and watched 3 movies in the evening. The next day, January 27th, 1959, was the 5th day after departure. The group left Settlement Number 41 and began their hike toward their goal, Mount Torton. After a day of hiking, Yudin's condition worsened. He suffered from femoral neuralgia with unbearable pain. After consideration, he decided to return alone so as not to burden the others. Thus, the number of team members decreased from 10 to 9. On January 31st, 1959, after 4 days of travel, they hiked to the Lozva River. They stored some food and equipment in a wooded valley to lighten their loads, intending to retrieve them on their way back. On February 1st, 1959, the group left the valley and began their journey to cross the pass. They planned to cross within a day and then stay overnight on the other side of the mountain. However, unexpected situations continuously arose, upsetting their plans. Due to bad weather, a blizzard reduced visibility, causing the group to lose their bearings. They veered off their original route and moved toward Kolatshakal Mountain. In the local language, it means Mountain of the Dead, located 20 kilometers south of their target peak. The peak has an altitude of 1,079 meters and is thus also called Mountain 1079. Mountain 1079 is located on the border between the Komi Republic and the Sverdlovsk region. 5 p.m. The group arrived at the eastern slope of Mountain 1079. At that moment, they realized they had gone the wrong way. After some research, they found that about 1.5 kilometers below their current position was a forest with relatively flat terrain. This forest could provide shelter from wind and snow, making it suitable for camping. But moving down there would mean their entire day's effort was completely in vain. It was getting dark. After much consideration, they decided not to go down. Instead, they chose to camp right at their current location on the mountain slope. And that very decision completely changed the fate of the 9 of them. As planned, the group was to return to town successfully within 2 weeks. Before departing, they promised the school sports club they would return to Vijay by February 12th and send a safety telegram. However, in reality, the group got lost due to the blizzard and their return was delayed. By February 12th, the school sports club had not received the expected telegram. Travel journeys can be affected by many factors. A delay of 1 to 2 days beyond the expected completion time is quite normal. Additionally, Yudin, who returned early due to illness, mentioned that leader Dyatlov had told him the journey would likely be delayed by a few days based on the current situation. Therefore, even without the telegram, the school club didn't think there was a serious problem. They trusted that all team members were experienced and would surely return safely. However, this was still a group of students. Their parents felt extremely anxious when they saw the school hadn't received a telegram. They constantly asked the school for updates. To reassure the parents, the club manager lied and said they had received a telegram from the climbing team. This allowed the parents to feel at ease. By February 20th, it was 8 days past the group's expected return. The school sports club still had no news, so they revealed the truth to the parents. The parents demanded the school send a search party immediately. That day, a search group consisting of teachers and student volunteers set out to find tracks. Soon after, the military also sent helicopters to join the search. The search and rescue forces followed the team's planned route, but found no traces. On February 26th, after 6 days of searching, a student from the search and rescue team found a tent on the slope of Mountain 1079, about 300 meters from the summit. When discovered, the tent was buried in snow. The ground where it was pitched was quite flat, with 8 skis underneath to support the tent. The tent door faced south, and the top was covered by 15 to 20 centimeters of thick snow. There was a flashlight next to the tent. It was turned on, but the batteries were dead. Inside the tent, searchers found 9 backpacks containing personal items like shirts, pants, and hats. Food and eating utensils in the tent were also left behind. Inside the tent, they also found 4 cameras and 5 diaries of the climbing team. The last entry in the diaries was dated January 31st. From this, searchers deduced that the entire group had lost their way and moved to Mountain 1079 on February 1st. However, the clues found could not yet answer the searchers' questions. The climbing team was an experienced group. Why did they choose to camp on the mountain slope? Yudin, the first member to return, guessed that on the first day of travel they were hit by a blizzard and couldn't go far. And perhaps because they didn't want to lose the altitude they had gained, they chose to camp on the slope. Searchers also discovered many cuts on the tent which were made from the inside using a knife. The size of one of the cuts was large enough for a person to pass through. But the most important task was still finding the group members. After that, all doubts would be resolved. Outside the tent, the search and rescue team discovered a series of footprints. There were 9 sets of tracks in total. Essentially, they corresponded to the 9 members of the group. Based on the footprints, it could be seen that some were wearing only one shoe and some were even barefoot. In such a cold place, it is very difficult to understand why the members would leave the tent without full clothing and shoes. Perhaps they encountered an emergency. These footprints stretched north and disappeared after 500 meters. Searchers explored the area near the end of the tracks but found no members. They guessed that the group members had continued to move. So they tried searching in the direction the footprints were heading. As expected, 1.5 kilometers north of the camp, searchers discovered a forest. There stood a very tall Siberian pine tree. They also found traces of a campfire under the tree. Based on the ash and the size of the remaining branches, it was estimated that the fire had burned for about an hour and a half. Near the fire, scattered about, were socks, handkerchiefs, and fragments of a sweater. The pine tree also showed signs of being climbed. Some high branches were broken and fallen at the base. Clearly, someone had climbed it, possibly to see further. At a distance of 2 to 3 meters from the pine tree, searchers found 2 team members, Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Both lay under the cold snow, showing no signs of life. They were wearing only underwear and no shoes. Doroshenko's hand was also burned. The next day, February 27th, searchers expanded their search area using the pine tree as the center. That day, they found the leader Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov and Zenaida Kolmogorova at distances of 300 meters and 630 meters from the pine tree. 6 days later, they found Rustem Slobodin, 480 meters away from the pine tree. All 3 were on the path between the pine tree and the camp, with their heads facing toward the camp. This suggested they might have been trying to return to the tent. The recovered members were examined by a forensic doctor. Doroshenko was 1.8 meters tall and the strongest in the group. When found, he was only wearing a shirt, a sleeveless top, and shorts. The right side of his shorts was torn and the socks on his feet were burned. The forensic doctor believed Doroshenko suffered trauma from a strong impact force causing pulmonary edema and lung bruising, though it wasn't fatal. However, The marks on his body did not match the discovery site, suggesting someone had moved him after he died. Krivonyshenko, found at the same location, was wearing a sweater and shorts. On his left foot was a pair of torn socks. There was no blood on his face, but the tip of his nose was missing. Inside his mouth, skin from his right hand was found. It's possible he had tried to bite his own hand to stay conscious or suppress his emotions. The examination showed he had third-degree burns, with the skin on his fingers and left toes scorched. Other than that, he had no other injuries. The leader, Dyatlov, was found with hands clenched before his chest, wearing a tank top and a sweater with no shoes. He had a cotton sock on his left foot and a wool one on his right. The watch on his wrist stopped at 5:31 a.m. There was dried blood on his lips. He had no internal organ injuries. Another member was Kolmogorova. She was found relatively well dressed. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and two sweaters, one of which was torn at the sleeve. Underneath, she wore 2 pairs of long pants and 3 pairs of socks, one of which was wool. On her waist, there was a baton-shaped bruise that was not life-threatening. The next member was Slobodin. He wore a shirt and a sweater on his body, 2 pairs of long pants, and 4 pairs of socks. He had 1 shoe on his right foot. The watch on his wrist had stopped at 8:45. On his skull, there was a small crack and a fractured frontal bone. Forensic doctors believed that after a heavy impact, he suffered shock and lost consciousness, leading to rapid hypothermia and death. Although the aforementioned individuals all had bruises on their bodies, none were life-threatening. The forensic doctors concluded that they all died from hypothermia. Considering the impact of the environmental temperature, the forensic doctors initially estimated that the time of death was over half a month prior. Based on their conditions, unnatural causes were quickly ruled out. However, when the remaining 4 members were discovered, the entire situation changed. On May 4, 1959, 2 months after the first 5 were found, the search team resumed their work. By then, the temperature had significantly increased, and the snow on the mountain had melted quite a bit. Search groups began looking for the remaining 4 people. Even though everyone knew their chances of survival were extremely low, the search efforts continued. Near the Ural Mountains, there is an indigenous people, the Mansi, a semi-nomadic tribe very familiar with the mountain environment. They quickly joined the search and rescue team and provided tremendous help. During the search, a Mansi man and his dog noticed scattered branches not far from the pine tree. They followed the trail of branches, and at a spot 50 meters from the pine tree, they found a pair of black sweatpants. The right leg of the pants was torn, believed to belong to the climbing team members. Continuing the search, they discovered the 4 remaining team members in a ravine 75 meters away from the pine tree. All were lying in the ravine, covered by a layer of snow about 4 meters thick. During the search a month earlier, the snow was so thick that the searchers couldn't spot the 4 of them. In reality, they were not far from the pine tree. Compared to the 5 previously found, they wore more clothes and were wrapped in pieces of torn fabric, which might have been torn from the other members' clothing. This also explains why the 5 people found earlier were wearing so little. One member was Lyudmila Dubanina. She was found wearing 2 shirts, 2 sweaters, a pair of pants, 2 pairs of socks, and a hat. Her face was missing soft tissue eyes and tongue. The cause of death was determined to be multiple fractured ribs and internal bleeding. Semyon Zolotaryov was found wearing 2 hats, a scarf, a long-sleeved shirt, a black sweater, and a coat. He also wore 3 pairs of pants. Soft tissue around his left eye was missing, as well as the eye itself. He also had multiple broken ribs and an open wound on the right side of his head. Both of the above individuals had myocardial and pleural hemorrhage. This indicates they were alive at the time of injury. Both had multiple broken ribs without soft tissue damage to their chests. This is a rare occurrence. Forensic experts believe the trauma was similar to injuries caused by an explosion. Nikolai Thibault Brignol was found wearing a leather hat and a wool hat, a sweater, a fur coat, and 3 pairs of pants. He wore wool socks and Siberian felt boots specifically designed against the cold. A watch on his wrist stopped at 8:14, and another stopped at 8:39. He had a fractured skull, but forensic doctors ruled out the possibility of hitting a rock. Notably, the location of the skull fracture had no corresponding external wound. The skull's role is to protect the brain. It is very hard and can typically withstand a force of 200 kilograms. Forensic doctors stated that to cause his type of injury, a tremendous force would be required comparable to trauma from a car crash. Lastly, Alexander Kolovadov wore a thick sweater and a ski jacket. Underneath, he wore 3 pairs of pants and wool socks. He had missing soft tissue around the eyes, missing eyebrows, and a deformed neck. There was an open wound behind his ear that exposed his skull. His skin was bluish-gray, with a hint of purple. The skin on his fingers and feet had softened and turned white. This matched signs of decomposition in a damp environment. Among the 4 of them, aside from Kolovatov, who died of hypothermia, the other 3 died from their injuries, and causing such trauma required immense force. Oddly, the facial soft tissue of all 4 was missing, and they didn't even have eyes, tongues, or eyebrows. Additionally, there was an anomaly in the clothing worn by Dubinina and Zolotaryov. Radioactive substances were detected on their clothes. Around Zolotaryov's neck hung a camera. This was the 5th camera the rescue team found. In freezing conditions, the team members didn't even have time to put on coats and shoes, yet Zolotaryov hadn't forgotten to bring his camera. The rescue team suspected the camera might contain crucial information. However, unfortunately, being submerged in snow water for days ruined the film, making it unrecoverable. By that time, all 9 members of the group had been found. They all passed away 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Out of the 9 people, 3 died from injuries caused by extreme force. This clearly differed from standard mountaineering accidents. Therefore, the Soviet military intervened in the investigation. After some investigation, Soviet authorities believed there were no signs of a struggle at the scene. The Mansi people living 80 kilometers away were very friendly, making it impossible to determine if the incident was a deliberate act by someone. The official Soviet investigation concluded that the 9 individuals were subjected to an unknown compelling force. After the results were published, the criminal proceedings for the case were closed. A detailed investigation report on the incident was classified, and all information was kept in a secret archive. In 1999, with support from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, the Dyatlov Foundation was established to promote the investigation of the Dyatlov incident and properly preserve the items left by the climbing team members. On April 12, 2018, 59 years after the incident, the mystery was so profound that it attracted worldwide interest, with everyone wanting to know what happened to the 9 climbing team members. A reporter from the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda proposed continuing the investigation into the event. Also, in April 2018, the remains of Semyon Zolotaryov, one of the 9 members, were exhumed. Experts conducted a re-examination, and the results stunned everyone. The DNA extracted from the remains, supposed to be Zolotaryov's, showed no similarities with any living relatives. Thus, the reporter suspected the person buried in the grave might not be Zolotaryov at all. Later, they also performed facial reconstruction from the skull and confirmed it matched Zolotaryov's image. Although the official investigation still showed no progress, public theories continued to emerge. There were over 75 different speculations regarding the incident. Some guessed that the group had gotten lost and accidentally entered the sacred land of the Mansi tribe, thus being attacked. However, there were no signs of a struggle around the camp and mountain 1079 was not sacred land for the Mansi tribe. Therefore, this hypothesis was incorrect. Others speculated that the group was attacked by a Yeti. The Discovery Channel produced a program in 2014 titled Russian Yeti the Killer Lives. Regarding this theory, they argued that in Russia, there is a creature named Yeti Large, in stature resembling a chimpanzee, living in high snowy mountains. The group accidentally entered the Yeti's territory and had their eyes and tongues eaten. Among the 4 cameras found at the scene, one photo in Nikolai's camera showed a path leading up to the forest. Not far beside the path, there was a blurry figure resembling a chimpanzee. Proponents of the Yeti theory claimed this was indeed the Yeti. Author Donnie Eichar, in his book, Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, presented a different hypothesis. He believed that sound waves were the cause of the demise of all 9 members. He spent 5 years researching the Dyatlov incident. He also personally went to Mountain 1079 where the event occurred and stayed there overnight to experience what the 9 members might have felt that night. He argued that Mountain 1079 has a unique shape with a perfectly dome-shaped peak. The strong winds blowing through could be distorted, creating the Kármán vortex street phenomenon. Author Donnie Eichar believed that at the time of the incident, strong winds passed over Mountain 1079 forming Kármán vortices and subsequently generating infrasound. Although the climbers couldn't hear the noise, the infrasound had a terrifying effect on their minds and bodies, causing shortness of breath, unexplained panic, etc. Therefore, they cut open the tent with a knife, aiming to escape outside as quickly as possible. In February 2019, exactly 60 years after the event occurred, relevant Russian authorities reopened the investigation into the Dyatlov incident. The conclusion from the previous investigation suggested the cause was a supernatural phenomenon. After a year of reinvestigation on July 11, 2020, the government announced the findings, stating the real cause of the Dyatlov incident was a slab avalanche occurring at that time. A slab avalanche is a type of avalanche that occurs when the accumulated snow mass exceeds the bearing capacity of its supporting foundation, triggering a slide. The investigation team proposed that when the climbers arrived at the campsite on Mountain 1079, the snowpack was quite loose. The accumulated snow between layers was not tightly bonded. When the team pitched their tent there to create a relatively flat surface, they dug out a portion of the snowpack. This action made the snow layer supporting the snow above it thinner. At that time, there was a severe blizzard, causing a lot of snow to pile up on the mountain slope. Gradually, the loose snow below could no longer bear the weight, and the snow above slid down the mountain like an ice block, thus causing a slab avalanche. Hearing the sound of the avalanche, the team members wanted to leave the tent. Thus, they immediately cut the tent open, not even having time to put on clothes or shoes. Upon running to a safe place, they stopped. Because the climbers hadn't managed to put on warm clothes, they quickly chopped some branches to build a fire for warmth. The scale of the avalanche wasn't massive, and the volume of snow was smaller than typical avalanches. Therefore, even though the slide collapsed the tent, it couldn't completely cover all the footprints of the team members. After the avalanche ended, the group wanted to return to the tent to get supplies. Their body temperatures were dropping and their lives were threatened. However, they faced a difficult problem. When the avalanche occurred, it was dark. The climbers only focused on fleeing without noting their direction. Now, they didn't know the exact location of the tent. So, someone climbed the pine tree wanting to try to see from a high vantage point to spot the tent. Later, the leader Dyatlov took some members and began the trek back to the camp. The remaining people waited at the original spot. Unfortunately, they couldn't return to the tent due to hypothermia and froze to death on the way. Unable to wait for rescue, some of those waiting under the pine tree also died of exposure. Before dying, they lost all sensation. To keep warm, they tried to get close to the fire, resulting in their hands getting burned. Afterward, to keep themselves warm, the 4 surviving people tore the clothes off their 2 deceased comrades. They wrapped the clothes around themselves and left the fire continuing down the mountain, hoping to find a safer place. The 4 people arrived at a spot 75 meters away from the pine tree, then proceeded to dig a hole, hoping to withstand the snowy wind. However, they didn't expect that right below the snow hole was a stream ravine. The 4 people fell into the ravine, were then covered by snow and buried underneath. Their eyes and tongues might have been eaten by scavengers. As for the radioactive substances found on their clothing, it might have been caused by the local environment. In 1957, 2 years before the Dyatlov incident, the Soviet Union experienced the 3rd largest nuclear accident in human history, the Kishtim nuclear waste explosion. The explosion occurred at a location 600 kilometers south of Mountain 1079. Investigators believed that radioactive fallout from the accident drifted to Mountain 1079, contaminating the environment. The climbers' clothing also caught these radioactive substances. In 2021, a team of physicists and engineers led by Alexander Puzrin from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology and Johann Gomm from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne published a paper. Through modeling and experiments, they provided support for the slab avalanche theory. They discovered that in a slab avalanche, the sliding snow slab can reach a density of 400 kilograms per cubic meter, which could cause severe trauma to a person's chest and head. This also explains why the climbers were injured by high pressure. After the event, a pass on Mountain 1079 was named Dyatlov Pass after the leader of the climbing team. At a location 500 meters southeast of the camp, there is a memorial plaque to commemorate all the team members who perished in the Dyatlov incident. The sole survivor from that year, Yuri Yudin, who had to return early due to illness, passed away from an illness in 2013. Throughout his life, he dedicated a lot to finding the true cause of the tragedy. Unfortunately, he couldn't wait until the final result. Fortunately, the investigation results officially released by Russia in 2020 serve as the most credible explanation. After 61 years passed, the truth finally emerged. Today's video ends here. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.